So welcome to Beauty of Colors podcast, Jamie. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So tell the listeners a little bit about you and your personal connection to sports.
Sure. So I'm Jamie. Growing up, sport was always what made me happiest, if I'm going to be honest. I was always very active. In high school, I was a three season athlete. In college, I played soccer. But growing up, sport was always a way of bringing people together. It was, incredible highs, some cringeworthy moments where you mess up and you learn from it. It's also one of my greatest teachers. So I think I realized the ability of sport to bring people together and also for people to really learn from it, for it to be more of a teacher and not just something physical, but also something mental and emotional. So when I was in graduate school and I had the ability to start my own company, I knew I wanted to work in sport and specifically with women athletes.
Wow, sounds great. So, so what's Flame Bearers and how was it started? Because you said you started your own company. It's called Flame Bearers.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Flame
Okay.
bearers. So flame as in the thing that comes out of a torch, and bearers as in the people who carry the flame. Uh, it's the first storytelling platform specifically for women Olympians and Paralympians. So we tell stories of diverse, resilient women from around the world, and we do that in three ways. So podcast, video, and live events, all with the goal of centering the narratives of these incredible athletes. In terms of why we did that, historically, 96% of sports coverage goes to male athletes. And of the really measly 4% that goes to women athletes, it's historically gone to white, able bodied women from the global north who play certain sports. So there was a massive quantity issue in terms of who was being featured. There was also a massive quality issue in terms of how they were being featured. So historically, women's sports has been sexualized. They talk about their outfits. They portray athletes in a very disempowering or pitying way, especially if you're a woman with a disability. You don't want to hear about yourself being portrayed in a way that kind of paints you with the pity brush. So we're addressing the quantity problem, but also the quality problem where we tell their stories in their own words. They tell their stories. And we're not co-opting the narrative. We're focusing on what they care about, how they want it told. So that's kind of why we did it. In terms of when, I was a graduate student. I was receiving my master's of policy at Harvard. And hilariously enough, this was actually a COVID adaptation. I had been pitching a role to the International Olympic Committee, where I'd spent months kind of networking my way, trying to get in front of them. And then COVID happened, and the Olympics and the Paralympics were postponed. And I said, I'm not going to wait. I'm just going to go for this. So I applied for funding within the Harvard ecosystem, and luckily they said yes. And it started off as a podcast, and 3 years later, now we tell stories multimedia, so video and events as well.
So what is Flame Bearers' mission and what do you hope to accomplish?
Yeah, such a good question. So our mission is to elevate diverse women's stories, to be role models for other young women and girls around the world. I think it's really hard to be what you can't see, but if you can see someone who looks and sounds like you, and they're the best in the world, or they are competing at that highest level, then you can dream that you can one day be that too. So that's kind of why we do what we do.
So, Jamie, Flame Bearers has hosts some incredible range of athletes, including some
Yes.
of the biggest names in sports like Sue Bird, is it?
Sue Bird,
Okay,
basketball player. Mm-hmm.
okay. And some of the athletes that maybe some of the listeners have never heard about. How do
Sure.
you just focus on extensive range of athletes? How do you focus on that?
Yeah, I like to be always very transparent about this. In the beginning, I would have loved to say that I always started with the idea of featuring Olympians and Paralympians. Paralympians are athletes with physical disabilities. I know that there's a lot of confusion around the Paralympics and the Special Olympics. So just to clarify that right away, um, in terms of why we work with both, it's really important to me that athletes with physical disabilities get the coverage and the support they deserve. I started this right at the beginning of Black Lives Matter, and I realized that as a white person, I had a responsibility and an opportunity to engage in conversations around race. And in the same way, as an able-bodied individual, we can't leave it up. It can't. This responsibility cannot be on the people with physical disabilities to have these conversations. There's an important role, an important opportunity for allyship as an able-bodied woman to elevate and support these women with disabilities, just in the same way that as a white person, I have an opportunity and a responsibility to have conversations around race or all these other issues that have historically sat with the individual of a certain group.
Wow.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and then there's also the whole, we want to make sure that we are working with women from different regions, so actively going out of our way to recruit women from communities where the support historically hasn't been there. So working with athletes on the Olympic refugee team, so women from Syria or Afghanistan. And that's really important to us because they don't have the support of a national governing body that a lot of other athletes have from their country.
So that's great, Jamie. So let's go back a little bit. You
Yeah.
said that you enjoy sports and you started playing in college, you said, or your freshman?
I did play in college. It's briefly I was a walk-on, and to be honest, at
Mm-hmm.
first I didn't make the team. So it's kind of funny because when I work with these athletes, I do not put on the Jamie the athlete hat. They are not talking to me or care about me because of my athletic prowess. So in my personal life, yes, sports has been a massive part of my life. But when I work with literally the best athletes in the world, I don't even bring up the fact that I like to run or I like to, do all these other things. I wear my marketer and my communicator hat.
So how do you approach your work with international athletes? Because you said you do work with different women from different countries, and given the
Yes,
language and the cultural barriers, how do you go about doing that?
it's definitely really challenging. So we did an episode with Tammy Leonelli from Chile. Luckily, I speak Spanish, so I was able to do that episode on my own. But there's definitely a language barrier that makes it challenging for many athletes. We had the opportunity to work with Zara Namati of Iran, and we had to work through a translator. We have an upcoming episode with a Japanese skateboarder this year. We're working with a translator. In terms of how we get them to say yes,
Mhm.
often we really appeal to who they are as a person. A lot of people have conversations around a recent game or a match, but very few people take the time to be like, oh, I noticed you're an aunt. I noticed you've been doing a lot of incredible advocacy work for this organization. Why? Tell us about that. And I think a lot of athletes really appreciate the humanizing element of these conversations because they're individuals with strengths and weaknesses and desires and struggles just like all of us. But most people don't focus on that. They focus on the 3-point shot that won the game. Hey, and don't get me wrong, it's interesting and it's exciting and it's great. But these are multidimensional human beings that have big lives outside of the sport too.
So, as flame bearers making a difference in the world, what would you tell someone who wants to join and be part of flame bearers and they're not that popular of an athlete and they
Yeah,
want to be part of it? What would you say to them?
I would say yes, we would love to have you. So there's a couple different ways we could work together. If you are someone, if you are a woman identifying individual, we have a whole community spotlight. So for someone who is an athlete of any sorts, or frankly, you just like sport in general, and you can define sport however you want. It could be yoga, it could be walking. It does not matter. We actually do a whole spotlight series on women who are not Olympians and Paralympians, but want to be a part of this community. And the reason we do that is because we believe everyone has a story that we can learn from, and it deserves to be told. And also, the lessons we learn from literally the best athletes in the world relate to all of us. We can all kind of find our inner Olympian or Paralympian through hearing through these stories. So way number one is apply to our community spotlight. Way number two is we have a collaboration page. So if anything of what I'm saying about really resonates with you, if you're like, wow, this sounds like an incredible organization, I would love to do something. I don't know what it is, but I wanna be in touch. Fill out our collaboration page. It takes 5 minutes. We'll get in touch with you. We'll have a conversation, and we'll see how we align, and we can go from there.
Okay. So Jamie, what's the website? Like what's the website address?
It's flamebears.com.
Okay. So are you also reaching out to people, contributors, like people who would contribute to Flame Bearers as well, or it's just athletes that you're reaching out to?
So right now, historically, we just work with the athletes in terms of telling their stories, but we're looking for sponsors in the corporation space, the nonprofit space. I mentioned we do events where we actively bring in athletes to share their stories. So, for example, recently, I guess it was not so recently, so last Super Bowl, we had the opportunity to bring 3 athletes out to Arizona to talk about their stories and creating more space for women athletes in a traditionally very masculine environment, the Super Bowl. So if you're a corporation or an organization that's looking for speakers, we have so many amazing women who are looking for opportunities like this, who are literally best in class athletes. So that's another way where if you're the head of a company and you're looking for someone to come in to share work that is, really frankly checks off a lot of buckets in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion. We have a whole roster of incredible women who are just out of the park speakers.
So Jamie, do you have any last words for the listeners on not giving up on their dreams? And what resources, apart from the website, what other resources can the listeners have access to for more information about Flame Bearers?
Sure. So where you can find us, so flamebearers.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, you name it. We're on all of them. Words of advice for our listeners is every athlete I've worked with talks about their own struggles and being knocked down and hurting and those bad days. And what I have found separates them from an athlete, frankly, even like myself, is their inability to give up. And they say, okay, it didn't work today, but maybe I can. These are the opportunities for growth and viewing failure not as a rejection, but rather as an opportunity for learning. So I think that lessons apply to everyone, whether you play sports or not, but really viewing no as a not today, but rather maybe tomorrow.
Well said, Jamie. Well, thank you for being on Beauty of Colors podcast.
Thank you for having me.